Now, US President Donald Trump says he'll announce a raft of tariff deals later on Monday, but confusion over his latest tariff threats has unsettled global markets. Trump says tariffs of up to 70% will hit countries without new trade deals by the 1st of next month. But he hasn't clarified which nations could be affected. All this uncertainty has pushed Asian markets into the red. The US president's also threatening members of the BRICS, a forum of emerging economies, and their supporters with additional taxes. He says any country aligning themselves with what he calls the anti-American policies of BRICS will be charged an additional 10% tariff. Introducing Deborah Elms, who's the head of trade policy at the Heinrich Foundation. That's a trade research foundation. She joins us live from Singapore. A very warm welcome to you. So it's been 3 months since Trump gave countries that 3-month window to negotiate trade deals with the US or face higher reciprocal tariffs. He's basically saying, time's up. Here's your new tariff rate. Do we assume most countries will have already quietly negotiated agreement within that 3-month window? Or is this a shakedown for those who haven't cut a deal to rush to some kind of agreement all before Wednesday?
I'm sure for some it does feel like a shakedown. I don't know how close we are on all of these deals. Many of them have been under discussion for the 90-day period. But trying to get an agreement in place on a range of issues is always difficult. And with only 90 days in which to operate and lots of countries in the queue, it's been challenging even for partners, U.S. trade partners that have, a lot of enthusiasm for this process. So it's not clear how many of them are actually close to done and how many of them are, waiting to see what happens. And I guess we'll know more potentially in just a few hours when Trump claims that he will be issuing at least a dozen more countries with a new number, a new reciprocal tariff number, which could be higher, could be lower, could be the same as what it was. We'll have to wait and see, I guess.
We will have to wait indeed. So, Deborah, Trump says in most cases, though, the new rates would go into effect on August the 1st. They'll range in value from maybe 60% or 70% tariffs to 10% and 20%. Either way, the markets in Asia, where you are down ahead of this deadline. The health of the global economy remains at stake here.
I think so. I mean, it would be one thing if this was an actual game in which you sort of said, who gets booted off the island, as it were. That would be one thing. But in this case, we're talking about real people's livelihoods, jobs, factory orders, shipping contracts. There's a lot that's actually at stake here in the real world. And I think what we're facing is this collision between a sort of pretend 90-day truce and the reality of tariffs actually could be hitting, and they could be quite high, and they could be quite soon. And I think that is why markets are feeling very jittery this morning, because it's unclear how this will come out, whether we'll actually get the kind of clarity that markets and businesses are hoping for, or whether this is just another bump in an extremely long and challenging road.
I'm talking about bumps in the road. I want to ask you about BRICS, if I may, because Trump also said on Sunday that any country supporting what he called the, quote, anti-American policies of the BRICS group will face an additional 10% tariff. He didn't explain what policies he was exactly referring to. Well, why does Trump have it in for the BRICS, just to remind our viewers? Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa and several other aligned countries.
Well, it's becoming a much bigger grouping. In fact, there's a number of Southeast Asian countries as well that have joined recently, including Vietnam, Malaysia, and Indonesia. So it's moving beyond its original handful of countries into a larger and larger grouping. And one of the things they did this weekend is they issued a statement that suggested that unilateral trade actions by the United States was a problem. And I think that's what Trump was reacting to in arguing that as a result of that, the whole organization was somehow anti-American, and therefore the countries involved in the BRICS would have to face an additional 10%. Now, we'll have to wait and see whether this is just a tweet that's sort of, sent out late on a Sunday night from the White House, or whether this is followed up with concrete action. But it adds another layer of uncertainty and risk for governments that are in the BRICS, but also busy negotiating with this Trump administration. What is the final number they're going to get? And does that final number include another 10%, or is it incorporated within the number that they received from Trump at the end of the deal discussions?
Among those countries now aligned with the BRICS include Egypt, Indonesia, the UAE as well. I wonder if collectively those countries have the power to push back in the same way China did when threatened with those eye-watering tariffs?
Well, it would be nice if we had better coordination in general along these sort of trade threats from the U.S. But I think it's very hard to get coordination because we have different impacts of these tariffs. Both the rates are different, right? So in Southeast Asia, for example, they range from 49% to 10%. But also because they have different exposure to the U.S. market. So some highly exposed, some less exposed. And to try to coordinate a common response, given those level of differences among the potential grouping, has meant that most governments have just gone unilateral. And that's been the approach for the last 90-something days. We'll see whether that continues, though. I think as more threats emanate from Washington, it's possible that we could develop more comprehensive collective responses, including, as we saw from the BRICS countries themselves, to say this is not the way we think policymaking should be done.
So it could essentially push the BRICS countries together if it's better that they work as one rather than in isolation. We know that in 2023, the US shipped goods with a value of almost $300 billion to BRICS countries, while buying merchandise worth almost $650 billion. Is the US more beholden to the BRICS than it's letting on here?
I think it's possible. I mean, it's unclear, first of all, how much knowledge Trump has of who's in the BRICS these days and of what kind of trade flows that actually take place, especially trade in goods, which is the only number that he cares about. And so it's always hard to interpret just a Trump tweet if it's not followed up by some other kind of actions, like how seriously do we need to take this? But if we take it as this is going to be U.S. policy, I think there could be some real challenges ahead for the United States. This is a grouping that is large and growing, that does include some important trade partners for the United States. It does include a certain percentage of the global economy and also a lot of very specific industries, or at least specific sectors that make a difference for the U.S. economy, including a lot of raw materials producers that are of importance for the United States. So it's early days on the BRICS threat. We'll see whether this is a one-off or whether it actually it becomes policy or whether it gets raised again in the future. But it shows the volatility and the uncertainty that we're seeing on the trade and economic side.
Yeah, it's very difficult to know how serious economic policy is when it's made on social media rather than anywhere else. Deborah, good to hear your thoughts. Deborah Elms there, Head of Trade Policy at the Heinrich Foundation.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.